This is a true crime podcast. It contains adult themes and content and may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
You lost all constitutional rights the moment you walked through that door. When the judge sat down there, I sentenced you to 10 years at the Idaho State Penitentiary. You walked in that door, you was a number. And the inmates understood that.
If you're out there and live with past superiors to be in here, just lay down and do it.
Those inmates that were here in the institution during an execution, it had an impression on them that maybe was still with them to some extent. Maybe they don't think about it anymore, but it had an impression on them, I'm sure.
They wouldn't let me out until I get back to stuff. 7 months later, I give it back to them.
That was one of the problems we ran into. Is you had 5 or 6 guys that were sitting in a place, smoking and joking and drinking coffee. Pretty quick, they'd hatched a plan in there to get under your skin some way or try to figure a way out.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Behind Gray Walls, a podcast about the old Idaho State Penitentiary and the men and women who spent some time here. We're starting a little bit different today, just for fun, just mixing it up. I'm Skye, and I'm sitting here in the trenches in person with Anthony.
Hello.
Yay. And, of course, Sam.
Hi, everybody.
And so today is going to be a little bit different, which is maybe why we're starting with me. When you start with me, we always know it's going to be a little funky, a little different. Don't have Anthony's soothing voice at the very beginning. But I am sitting here looking at an enormous stack of papers that is research for just 2 people. And so we're going to switch it up a little bit today. And Sam is just going to tell us 1 or 2 big, giant stories. So you're going to be the only one talking today, right, Sam?
That's correct. This is going to be a little different. I'm doing 2 people, but they kind of interweave. And so I'm going to be telling 2 different residents of the site, but I'll be telling them together because they have a little bit of crossover, as you will see.
Well, I am very excited. But to start off, how is everyone? I mean, how's everyone doing?
Oh, my gosh.
Summer.
Good. You know, there has been a menace at the prison that has been plaguing the site for a couple weeks now.
The Branimal.
The Branimal.
Dun, 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 dun.
Back in 1971, in the clock, they talked about the Branimal, this thing that was infesting the site, and people, you know, all the residents, all the prisoners here were walking in groups because they were afraid of the Branimal. Turns out it was a woodchuck that they named the Branimal, and this year we have the Branimal back, and he brought a girlfriend, a wife, a partner, and now there are 2 little mini Branimals running around along with Mrs. Branimal, and they are causing havoc at the site, just digging underneath the wall, digging into cell houses, digging into the tunnel that leads from the dining hall to the basketball court. So good news, just before we started recording, we captured one, and yes, so he is going to be relocated, and hopefully we can track the rest of his family and relocate them many, 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 many miles away, maybe into Oregon. We'll just drop them off a one-way ticket to Oregon.
So you think you caught the Branimal? You think you caught the patriarch? Paterfamilias.
Big boy.
Okay.
Very large woodchuck. Yes. I would not tingle with this Branimal. So, yes, as we are recording, he is being picked up and relocated. And
I mean, talk about the ultimate escape artists. Sounds like that they are just digging underneath the walls the way that all of our previous residents used to want to. So he's living the life.
Yeah, he's been looting the commissary.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, just everything.
Gang of outlaws.
We found a stash of cigarettes and unstruck matches in his lair.
Little stinkers. Yeah, I love them. They're really cute. I will say they're so adorable. They've been hanging out, the funniest thing, up on the steps in the dining hall leading up to the nest where the guard overlook was. That's where he's been hanging out and just lounging and sunbathing. So I have a bunch of photos. I've been, tracking him on my social media, Instagram stories. And
so amazing.
Yeah, half the staff are like, let him go, free my man, and I am of the, judge, jury, executioner. I'm ready to take care of business if I need to.
Anthony wants law and order.
I was going to say the debate over the death penalty continues even today.
It does. And usually, I am a vegetarian. I've been most of my life. And I love animals. I love everything. But man, I can't stand it. People jumping the wall or being in the prison when they're not supposed to be, like Branimal. That's where, my passion outweighs my love and passions.
The warden Anthony laying down the law. So I love that we have Branimal's descendant just wreaking havoc still to this day.
Make his grandpa proud.
Yeah, seriously. Amazing. Well, no, I love it. That's a real look as like what's going on in the prison today.
Yeah.
At least the old retired one. Great story to segue us into some other residents who lived here that were humans. I'm very bad at transitions, but Sam, let's hear what you've got.
I'm very excited to be able to talk about Willis Brundridge and Ira Harder. This is one of my favorite stories that I've ever researched here at the penitentiary. However, it is also going to be a tough one. The people I want to talk about lived hard lives. And the story I'm going to share with you today will include violence, sexual assault, suicide, child abuse, and murder. So please, listener discretion is advised, and take care of yourself as we delve into a one-of-a-kind case. Edward Waldo died in 1947. Waldo, a barber and rancher, was born in Ohio, or at least so he claimed. He lived in California for the last 17 years of his life, devoted to his family and work. Not necessarily a pillar in his community, but part of it just the same. For all intents and purposes, he appeared to be a quiet, hard-working man who cared deeply about his family. He kept his head down, he got his work done, and for the most part, he stayed out of the papers. Now, this is merely speculation, but if I were a betting man, I would wager Waldo did not devote much time to talking about his parents, both of whom he lost at an early age. In fact, I doubt he talked much about his life prior to California, and I'm sure he did not talk about the bullet scars across his body. After his death, Waldo left behind a wife, 2 sons, and 3 grandchildren. But he took his secrets to the grave. The community of Lodi, California never learned Waldo's true past. Waldo was a wanted man, a gunslinger who'd been on the run for 39 years. Thanks to some incredible detective work on behalf of his great-granddaughter, Lori Fell, along with assistance from the Idaho State Archives and the Weiser Historical Society, we're finally ready to tell a story that is long overdue. Join us for a chapter of the old Idaho penitentiary history that will help us reveal the truth behind a 116-year-old mystery.
So are you telling me that we are going to find out where's Waldo?
Exactly.
I'm so sorry. I had to do it. You can't have the name Waldo.
Such an amazing, intense drive towards a very serious start. That's the best. Oh my God, Skye, you're hilarious. I love it.
I was trying to figure out where to put a Where's Waldo joke, and I was like, no, Skye's got me covered. So
what can I say?
I purposely left it out because I knew you'd get me covered.
And as soon as you said Waldo, I was like, what am I going to say my Where's Waldo joke? And it was so perfect that you were like, he's been on the run for 39 years. I was like, and with that, let's hear where is Waldo?
Our story begins in a saloon in California 79 years prior to the death of Edward Waldo. On May 26, 1868, A.J. Joff played cards with a group of soldiers at Mills Creek. Surprise Valley, California saw a lot of traffic that decade, including homesteaders, miners, and soldiers. At the time, U.S. soldiers were abundant in California due to the military conflicts with native people defending their homelands from this sudden mass migration. Joff, knowing how thirsty all of these travelers would be, opened a saloon near Mills Creek, near the border of northern Nevada. He earned his gold by selling whiskey and then made a little extra cash by playing cards on the side. That night, Joff played cards with his friend Ferguson, along with 2 soldiers. Sergeant Brown and Sergeant Cassidy. Cards were drawn and played as the pile of money on the table grew larger and larger. But a draw too good to be true drew suspicion from the soldiers. The troops accused Ferguson of cheating. A flash of silver, and Brown and Cassidy's guns were out. The soldiers, without taking their pistols off Ferguson and Joff, began to gather the money on the table. The San Francisco Examiner reported, Joff maintained the coolest indifferences at the pistols under his nose. Joff told them,
I am used to such things.
Another soldier, Sergeant Green, attempted to intervene and defuse the tense situation. The men agreed to have Green hold on to the money until the card players could settle the dispute. Green, eager to help but overly intoxicated, attempted to gather the money, but losing his balance, he knocked it over instead. Joff, on his feet, pulled his gun. All 4 men opened fire. Bolt 1 hit Joff in the arm, who fired a bolt into Cassidy. Sergeant Brown took a bolt in the shoulder and Ferguson in the side. Cassidy and Brown, outmatched and outgunned, attempted to flee. Cassidy collapsed just outside the saloon, dead from his wounds. Joff chased after Brown. Justice Balliner rushed to the scene of the crime after hearing the gunshots. He arrived just in time to find Joff pulling the trigger on Brown. Balliner grabbed the hammer of the gun just before it fired, which, if this claim is true, saved Brown's life by less than a second. Justice Balliner arrested both men. All 3 survivors of the fight were immediately given medical attention. The following day, the coroner's jury acquitted Joff on a plea of
necessary self-defense.
I'm not sure how the community viewed Joff or his past history in California, but for whatever reason, this verdict sat very poorly in Surprise Valley. They saw Joff as a cold-blooded killer. It did not help his case that the following month, on June 23rd, he murdered Solomon Brundridge at Deep Creek. Solomon was not only well-liked in the community, but he was also the father of 6, with his youngest boy just turning 6 himself. The murder pushed the community over the edge. On June 27th, a mob surrounded the jail and quickly overpowered the armed guards. They dragged Joff into the street, tied a rope around his neck, and hanged him. Right then and there, with no trial. Willis Brundridge, Solomon's oldest living child, only 17 at the time, lived in the area when Joff murdered his father, and his neighbors lynched his father's murderer. Willis F. David Brundridge was born in 1850 in Springfield, Missouri, to Solomon Brundridge, 21, and Elizabeth Hendrickson, 20. At various points in his life, he went by Willis, David, W.F., and even William. But for simplicity's sake, I'll continue to use his birth name. Born the second oldest of 7 children, Willis had 3 brothers and 3 sisters, one of whom, Susan, died at 13. During the Civil War, the family went west, like so many others, to California, and there they settled in the Sierras before heading to Surprise Valley. Willis attended school for 3 years and received religious instruction. Later in legal documents, he described his religion as MS, which I'm guessing refers to either Methodists or Mormons. I could not find why Joff killed Solomon, nor could I find any information on any of the individuals involved in the mob killing, but Willis, at age 17, and in California at the time, could have possibly witnessed his father's murder and or participated in a subsequent lynching of A.J. Joff. I have no historical evidence to support this theory, but I do believe it is a real possibility. 5 years later, at age 23, he married the 21-year-old Elizabeth Dentler in Lincoln, Nebraska. For the next 30 years, Willis moved from one town to the next, mostly around the intersections of California, Nevada, Idaho, and Oregon. This might seem a little bit suspicious, but actually not uncommon for families to be highly transient during this period of Western expansion. In 1875, Willis and his wife welcomed their first child into the world, a baby boy named Samuel Jackson Brundridge, after which the family soon relocated to Nevada. The next year, on July 15, 1876, W.E. Lemons, a rancher living outside of Reno, received an unexpected visitor with some rather bad news. George DeLong stood at his door and confessed to killing his neighbor, Samuel Miller. DeLong had been employed by Miller for about 11 months. After a chore dispute over a horse, the very intoxicated Miller threatened to lasso him and
pull his neck off.
Miller attacked DeLong, who during the fight in self-defense grabbed an axe and struck Miller not once, not twice, but 3 times. Lemons sent for the sheriff, gathered a few neighbors, and asked for DeLong to take him to the murder scene. About half a mile from the house, they came upon Olivia Miller, a German immigrant and the wife of the murdered man, crying in the road. DeLong took her hand in his and comforted her as the party made their way to the crime scene. Once there, Olivia lay on the porch in despair, and several men had to carry her inside and place her on the bed. They found Miller out back, about 10 feet away from the house, between the well and the woodpile. Right away, DeLong's story began to fall apart. The ground around Miller remained undisturbed, as if no struggle transpired. Miller lay face down in the dirt. At least some of the axe blows came from behind. And no, Miller had not been struck with an axe 3 times. He had been struck with an axe 9 times. Many who saw the crime described Miller as
mashed to a pulp.
The following day, a coroner's jury brought in witnesses to testify on what happened. While on the stand, Olivia explained she had been at the Junction House when her husband, drunk on whiskey, and DeLong went to the couple's home together. After some time, DeLong came back to the Junction House.
He came back alone. He didn't speak to me except for when he took me by the hand and told me to go home. I went. He went to the house. I think he went in. Stayed in the house for a good while. Did not see anyone taken from the house. Don't know where he went. Don't know where he is.
She went on to say,
Saw DeLong then, did not see DeLong again. Did not see axe. Have not seen my husband since. Heard he was killed for the first time this morning. I went out and saw the coffin when the men came in for the clothes.
Olivia claimed to be ignorant of her husband's death. Olivia not only contradicted herself, but Lemon's testimony as well, who stated,
Mrs. Miller was present and told me where to find the body. She acted as if she knew her husband was dead. She acted that way from the time I first met her on the road.
Olivia's changing story and her over-friendliness with DeLong got her charged with accessory to murder. The charge both surprised and panicked her, and for the following weeks her nervousness only grew. Not wanting to house Olivia with the other male prisoners, including DeLong, in the Reno jail, the sheriff instead kept her locked up at the district attorney's office, and on July 30th, she escaped. At some point during the night, she pried the door open with a piece of wood and disappeared into the night, leaving behind her bonnet and gloves. And just like that, she's gone, baffling local law enforcement who were left without a trace, until August 14th, when the sheriff discovered the Brundridge family had been hiding her all along. The papers struggled to agree on the location of Olivia's hideout, claiming it to be the Yager Ranch, Old Jim Smith Ranch, or the Brundridge Ranch, but all were in agreement that David and Jack Brundridge were the ones aiding, supplying, and hiding her, though authorities were not sure whether they aided her out of sympathy or in a desire to collect the reward money. Now this is where it gets a little confusing. Are David and Jack members of Willis's family? Short answer is I don't know. Long answer is there probably is some connection. This is the exact area where the Brundridge family lived during the late 1870s. The family also did seem to have many associates outside the law. Willis often, including his time in Idaho, went by the name David. Samuel also went under the alias Jack. But since Samuel's only 1 year old at this point, I really doubt he had much aid to offer Olivia. Strangely enough, later on in his life, Samuel is also referred to as Young Jack, which also makes me wonder if Young Jack Brundridge has a connection with Old Jack Brundridge. Now, whatever her involvement with the Willis family, Olivia's recaptured, although Olivia would never be convicted of her husband's murder. Because on August 26th, she leapt out of the window on the top floor of the courthouse.
Wow.
Her 20-foot dive created some exceptionally graphic wounds that I'm going to spare you the details of. She lived another 6 hours before finally dying. In October, the state found George DeLong guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 19 years in the Nevada State Prison.
So this is like a Josie Kensler sort of situation. I gotcha.
Very much
gotcha.
so.
Okay.
Very much so. I had the same thought when I was reading this. In 1877, 2 states away from the Brundridge family, Ira Harder, 42, and Caroline Brackenbury, 25, celebrated the birth of their second child, a boy whom they named Ira Jr. in Salt Lake City. The following year, the couple parted ways. Caroline remarried Amos Andrews, taking with her Ira and his sister Elizabeth, who was 6 years Ira's senior. The mother moved the children to Elmo, Idaho. Caroline went on to have 2 more children with Amos, Caroline Jr. and George. Ira only attended school for 2 months, but did learn to read and write. His family actively worshiped the Mormon faith his entire life. Ira Sr. went on to live in Glens Ferry, but seemed to have lost all connection with his children. Ira, years later, explained his father died during his childhood. While this is not exactly true, it is possible that this is what his mother told him after the divorce. At 4 years old, Ira's mother, Caroline, died, dramatically shifting the trajectory of the lives of her oldest children. It's unclear whether the stepfather, Amos, had any intention of raising his wife's children, but sadly, this does not seem to be the case. At 13 years old, Ira's sister Elizabeth was given in marriage to Charles Heath. Charles, at age 43, already had a wife, but as a practicing polygamist, he happily let Elizabeth join the family. At 15, she gave birth to the first child, Caroline.
Wow.
When Caroline, the oldest child, turned 13 in 1899, she too was given away in marriage. When this topic comes up, I often hear people saying like, oh, that's just how things were back then, or oh, that's the age where most women got married in the West. And honestly, historical research does not validate any of these claims. Based on data collected in the U.S. Census in 1890, the average age for men to marry was 26.1, and for women it was 22. Of course, this is an average. There's definitely both sides of the spectrum there, but in modern day, it's about 30.4 for men and 28.6 for women. Keep that in mind when you think about Elizabeth at age 28, watching her daughter Caroline be given away in marriage. With his mother dead, his father out of the picture, and his sister now gone, Ira found himself utterly alone. He reported that he first left home to find his place in the world at age 6.
I feel like other podcasts kind of make a joke about it. We're like, oh, 11, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
It was kind of back then that way, though. Like, oh,
Yeah.
6 years old, though.
Yeah. In 1880, back in Nevada, the Brundridge family were working on living at Pyramid Lake. The year prior, newspapers proclaimed the capture of the Pyramid Lake wild man. This wild man did not come close to the fame and recognition of the Idaho wild man talked about in the Halloween special of this podcast, but it is important to point out the Pyramid Lake monster did in fact come first. Perhaps it acted as inspiration for T.E. Pecote when he put ink to page and created the Idaho legend. The hunters who supposedly captured it at Pyramid Lake found the wild man eating berries and cheese. The Santa Cruz Weekly asked,
"Be kind enough to tell us where this wild man obtained his cheese?"
I have no idea what the Brundridge family thought about this story. Perhaps young Samuel heard the wild man's exploits around the fire. Perhaps the family kept a close eye on their berries and cheese.
I have no idea where he got this cheese.
So, string cheese. What?
Did you just quote the Princess Diaries? Must be string cheese.
We do not have a physical description or photos of Samuel, but his father, Willis, was nothing short of a striking man. Standing 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing 135 pounds, which for his day was just a little short and lean, he wore long hair combed to the side and a beard that grew to his shirt, both described as dark gray. His most notable feature, of course, were his piercing blue eyes. Jim Riley, the incredible Idaho State's archivist for the government records, compared them to the eyes of the famous gunslinger Wild Bill Hickok. And he is right. They are nothing if not striking.
I was going to say he also gives off a semi like Rasputin vibe.
Totally.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so when you said piercing blue eyes, I thought for sure you were going to say Rasputin.
Yeah.
In 1894, rancher W.W. Morton reported a cattle theft, and the court swore out arrest warrants for Henry Packard and Samuel J. Brundridge. The authorities arrested Henry, but were unable to track down Samuel. They took Henry to court, and the trial lasted several days with significant back and forth on whether or not lack of evidence could lead to an acquittal. In the end, the court determined there were in fact enough facts to prove the crime. Judge Chenning sentenced Henry to 2 years in the Nevada State Prison for grand larceny. The Reno sheriff never did manage to apprehend Samuel. For probably obvious reasons, the Brundridge family decided to pack up and continue to a new city. In 1898, they arrived at their new home in Weiser, Idaho. The land where Weezer currently resides originally belonged to the Shoshone people. The Shoshone Nation occupied lands in Idaho, Oregon, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, and Canada. The entire Snake River Plains acted as a hunting ground, gathering place, and home to these people for thousands of years. Chief Eagle Eye led the Weezer band of the Shoshone during the early days of the territory. In 1874, the year before the birth of Samuel Brundridge, the U.S. government forced the Weezer band off their homelands onto the Moara Reservation in Oregon. 4 years later, due to the terrible conditions of reservation life, Eagle Eye led his people back to their home, only to discover it now occupied by white settlers. They moved to the mountains, and for 2 decades they refused assimilation. The 1890s were a calm time for the city of Weezer, but the rest of Idaho saw some pretty dramatic crime. Josie Kensler, along with her lover, Alfred Friel, killed her husband, John Kensler, in 1896, the same year women got the right to vote in Idaho. The following year, the state convicted Josie and Alfred of John's murder and sentenced them to the penitentiary. See episode 2 for more details. On August 13th, Butch Cassidy, Eliza Lay, and Bob Meeks robbed a bank in Montpelier, Idaho, of somewhere between $7,000 and $16,000, a modern equivalent of somewhere around $600,000. The only member of the Wild Bunch gang to ever serve time for this crime was the notorious and dangerous Bob Meeks. You can check out Stool Pigeon Saturday with Suzanne in Season 1 to hear that full story. The Brundridge family arrived in Weezer in 1898, just after those events took place in Idaho. They found a city on the grow with a mild climate perfect for orchards and livestock. Within 2 years, Weezer reached a population of 1,364. The family operated a small farm, and Willis worked as a hostler. Skye, Anthony, do either of you know what a hostler is?
Is it something to do with horses?
It does. I had no idea what this was. I had to Google this.
Hostler.
Man, is this the person who shoes a horse?
A hostler is a stable boy for a hotel, taking care of all of the horses for the hotel guests. Nice. The original valet parking.
I love it.
The family lived in the city for less than a year when they became acquainted with a young cowboy who just arrived in the area. His name, of course, was Ira Harder. Ira, at 22 years old, stood 5 feet and 6 inches tall. Weighing 160 pounds, he had dark brown hair and a sandy mustache. Others often described him as sturdy or well-built, and you can see this in his later prison mugshot. A man with solid shoulders and body made strong from years of hard farm work. He had a very stoic look in his eyes. Ira, looking for work, soon met the Brundridges, and Willis agreed to have the young man run some errands on behalf of the family. However, some sort of disagreement ended the relationship. On October 1st, Ira, just finishing up at the Brundridge home and about to leave for the day, got into an argument with Willis. Before Ira knew it, Willis had pulled his gun with the barrel pointed right at his face. Samuel drew his knife. He struck at Ira. Ira fled the scene, and Samuel yelled after him,
"You son of a bitch! I will kill you before sundown tonight."
Samuel did not kill Ira that night, but this is also where the bad blood began. From here it only grew. Samuel began to ask around town for a gun. When he asked his friend Johnny Walker, Johnny wanted to know why he needed it. After Samuel told him he planned on killing Ira with it, Johnny refused. Ira became only more nervous as gossip continued to get back to him. More established and with more friends in the community, the 25-year-old Samuel told everyone he planned to kill Ira. Whatever his father had started, Samuel made it very clear he planned to finish. Ira found himself constantly looking over his back until finally he had enough and decided to choose the time and place for the men to settle it once and for all. On the night of December 12th, 1898, Ira wore a .32 American 6-shooter. Samuel must have managed to get someone to lend him a gun because he wore a short-barreled .38.
You can see those here in the J. Curtis Earl Weapons Memorial Museum at the Old Idaho Penitentiary.
What a plug. That's where we record, in case you don't know.
Community members flocked to the Weezer Opera House for the performance of High Henry's Company, just 13 days before Christmas. But Ira did not stop to listen. Instead, he walked past through the frosty night air and entered the old Judge Saloon. Once inside, he found Samuel, who, taking a brief hiatus from a game of poker, sat, warming himself next to the stove. Ira confronted Samuel. As if expecting him, Samuel warned,
"You son of a bitch. I'll kill you before morning."
Come outside and we'll settle it.
Samuel stood up, but instead of moving forward, he took a step back. George Pence and others, sensing trouble, began to move towards the two men. George grabbed Ira with both hands. J.H. Bruce grabbed Samuel before either man could make his move. George told Ira,
"There's no need to have any trouble."
The men, now separated, shrugged the hands off their shoulders and walked away. Samuel returned back to the table to continue the game of cards. Ira followed him. Ira wanted to fight. Despite Samuel's previous threats, he seemed uninterested in going toe-to-toe with Ira and settling things with their fists. Perhaps he thought Ira could best him in a boxing match. Perhaps this was his attempt to de-escalate the situation. Besides, Samuel had protection from the friends all around him. But being so outnumbered did not seem to concern Ira, who called out,
"I would like to get all three of the sons of bitches out in the street. I can whip them all."
Samuel continued to play cards.
"You are a dirty son of a bitch."
Samuel's calm started to give.
"Don't call me that again."
"You are a dirty son of a bitch."
Samuel leapt to his feet. The men threw back their coats and pulled their guns. Samuel's gun smoked. Ira shot through the face. Blood began to gush from the wound. He turned his head to the left, then right, shaking at it as if trying to spit the bullet out of his mouth. Then Ira's gun went up and fired into Sam. Samuel and Ira emptied their guns, bullets flying everywhere, wood exploding around them. Patrons of the saloon leapt to the floor. Outside, a stray bolt tore through Henry's brass drum. Gunsmoke filled the air. Samuel grabbed onto the table to steady himself before collapsing onto the chair, then the floor, dead before the smoke cleared. Ira staggered out of the building and into the cold night air. Shot through the face and chest, he stumbled up 2nd Street, leaving a trail of blood in the white snow. He walked this way for half a mile, but once he got back to the house he rented, he collapsed. On December 13th, Idaho Statesman reported the deaths of Samuel and Ira. Quote, "Weezer men settled their feuds with pistols. Ira Harder and Sam Brundridge engage in a desperate duel. Both receive mortal wounds." But the truth, it turned out, was far more complicated. Dr. Numbers arrived to the scene as soon as he could. Samuel might have been dead, but Ira still held on to life. He removed his medical tools and blade, and the doctor immediately got to work.
Made an examination of the wounded man. Found that the first ball crashing through the upper maxillary bone immediately above the teeth and below the nose, passed through the right temporal bone and lodged below the temporal artery just above the right ear.
Only a few centimeters higher and the shot would have caused immediate death. The doctor, likely operating under candlelight, carefully cut the bolt out of Ira's head. The second bolt, however, proved to be more difficult. It
entered on the right side, somewhere about the 5th or 6th rib, and passing through the pleural cavity, immediately behind the breastbone, passed upward into the left shoulder, into the region of the joint.
Despite his best efforts, the bolt could not be removed. In translation, the first shot went through Ira's face, above the teeth, bounced around the skull, and lodged above his ear. The second shot tore through the chest, between his ribs, punctured a lung, ricocheted up, and lodged near the shoulder. That bolt could not be removed. Despite all of this, the doctor allowed.
There are chances of his recovery.
On Christmas Eve, 1898, the Caldwell Tribune updated their readers by saying, quote, "The man Ira Harder, who was shot dead in a saloon brawl at Weezer some days ago, is alive and improving. His antagonist is still dead."
His antagonist is still dead. Rough to Sam. Ira lived, but he's dead. He's real dead.
By what could only be described as a miracle, Ira survived. In that March, he went on trial. 6 of those present the day of the fight were called to testify on what they saw. With any saloon fight, with alcohol running freely, there are many contradictions, but the group did agree on a few things. Ira went there that night looking for a fight, though it did appear he intended it to be a fist fight. All agreed the draw was lightning quick, but most claimed that Samuel did, in fact, go for his gun first. During the trial, there is no mention that Samuel still had a warrant out for his arrest in Nevada for cattle rustling. It seems the community of Weezer remained oblivious to Samuel's past criminal record. The defense attempted to use character witnesses, but this worked out poorly since all of them admitted to not knowing Ira well or having only known him in his childhood. Luckily for Ira, many were willing to testify about the many threats Samuel made during the months leading up to the fight, including Johnny Walker, who told the jury about refusing to give Samuel his gun. Interestingly enough, some of the biggest advocates for Ira during the trial were the Waldos, who testified on his behalf about the Brundridge's family's hostility towards him. When brought to the stand, Ira could not explain why the family held so much animosity towards him. He testified,
I was afraid of my life all the time, right along from the first racket to the last, because he had threatened my life.
Did you pull your gun before he shot you?
No, sir, I had not. Nor I made no effort to pull my gun. Did not have my hand on my gun.
Dr. Numbers had testified last. 9 bullets were exchanged in the gunfight, and miraculously no bystanders were hit or killed during the battle. Ira shot Samuel in the chest, stomach, and groin. The bullet that pierced his heart had caused almost instant death. The doctor explained the 2 bullets Ira took, saying,
Both wounds might have been fatal.
The defense introduced the bullet the doctor removed from Ira's head into evidence. The bullet in his chest remained in Ira for the rest of his life. On St. Patrick's Day, 1899, the jury returned a verdict of guilty of murder in the 2nd degree, and Judge Stewart sentenced Ira Harder to 25 years of hard labor at the Idaho State Penitentiary.
25 years.
Oof.
So,
2nd degree, though. You know.
So the Waldo family, they testified against Ira?
They testified for him.
For him. Okay, yeah, sorry. And how bad the Brundridge family was.
So the Waldos, kind of were allies to him the whole time.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I'm sorry, who was Willis?
Willis is the father of Samuel.
Okay. All right, perfect. Thank you.
Ira, age 22, arrived at the prison the same day. He reported his occupation as laborer. He drank moderately, smoked, and chewed tobacco, but still practiced the Mormon faith. The condition of his teeth were good. His only possessions when he entered the prison was a pocket knife. He stated both his parents were dead and listed his only living relative, a sister named Mrs. Heath, in Almo, Idaho. The prison gave Ira the number 679. Little did Ira know that his sister did not plan on staying in Almo for long. In 1902, Charles Heath, the father of 9 children and the husband of 3 wives, one of whom was now deceased, turned 58. But his youngest wife, Elizabeth, now 31, growing wary of the relationship, ran away. She made her departure accompanied by the family ranch hand, John Michael Chambers, 24. Naturally, Heath refused to grant a divorce, but John and Elizabeth lived as common-law husband and wife, and Elizabeth went on to have 2 more children.
How many did she have with 3 with the other guy?
8.
Oh.
So she has 10 children.
But you know what?
So far.
Fair enough. But I kind of respect the move. Like, if you're in a marriage, a polygamous marriage with a guy who's 20, 30 years older than you, and then this hot young guy comes along, good for her.
Once again, it's hard not to think about Josie and
right.
the Josie Kensler story.
Did she take all 8 of her kids with her, or they stayed with the dad?
They stayed with the dad. So that's kind of a bold decision to make there.
Yeah.
And since she was not officially married, there's no adultery charge that could be placed against her. So,
well, I don't know. I don't know if he was only legally married to her or the others, but the family speculated she didn't marry Chambers because of the fact that she still had this marriage to him, and that's why they're common law husband and wife. But then again, I don't know.
Was she still a believer after?
I don't know.
Because I wonder if it's more, because like you say, they really can legally only be married to the first one, and the rest are like quote unquote spiritual bonds.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if she practiced that, if she still felt that
couldn't be violated.
was the case. Yeah, that's curious.
But Either way, I doubt her brother Ira knew any of this. Stepping back into 1899 again, Ira just entered prison. But back in Weezer, Willis and Elizabeth Brundridge were still mourning the loss of their oldest son. It turns out Samuel was not the only child the couple lost to misfortune. 1900 census, they reported 11 children, but only 5 still alive. These were hard times, not just for the Brundridge family, but many others living in the community. That September, the Weezer Semi-Weekly Signal reported cattle thieves in the neighboring county. By October, the problem had gone so out of hand that the Salmon River settlers organized a
protective association against sheep rustlers and cattle thieves.
2 men impacted by these crimes were William and Joseph Smith. Not that Joseph
Smith.
And this is the same time William Wilde is stealing
Yeah.
horses and cattle in that
I
area.
was thinking of that yesterday. William and Joseph Smith recently lost a pinto gelding at Rock Creek. An investigation discovered the stolen horse in the possession of none other than Willis Brundridge. The trial moved quickly and the state found Willis guilty of grand larceny and sentenced him to 5 years in the Idaho State Penitentiary. The Idaho statesman explained, "It is hoped that this conviction will break up a gang of stock thieves which have been extensively operating in this section." While I found nothing to prove Willis's involvement in a gang of stock thieves, his family's prior history of rustling does make it a possibility. On October 16th, Willis arrived at the prison. Willis reported his age as 51, though he was actually 49. He put his occupation as hostler, married with 5 living children, chews tobacco, but does not drink. Willis said he left home at 20. His mother died when he was 25, and his father died, as we already know, when he was 17. He never served in a prison before. His teeth were poor, described as
about all gone.
Ooh. He wore a size 5.5 boot and a full beard. His clothing were described as very poor, so much so that the prison destroyed them as opposed to saving them for his release.
Ooh.
The prison gave Willis the number 716. With the recent departure of Warden Charles Von Dorm, who received a dismissal after hitting a guard, Willis entered the prison under the supervision of Warden John Haley Sr., with W.H. Atkinson as deputy warden and Haley Peffley as clerk. There were 16 guards recorded on the payroll to oversee 4 federal prisoners and 136 state prisoners, including Willis, as well as the man who murdered his son, Ira Harder. As strange as it sounds, I found no documentation about any encounters these men had. Since guards did not record any fights occurring between them, they must have avoided each other the best they could in the prison, which only had 2 cell houses during this time. I have to wonder what their reunion might have been like. Willis seemed to have started the fight that Ira finished with gunpowder and lead in the old Judge Saloon. Willis's stay in prison turned out to be excessively short. On July 25, 1900, Governor Frank Studenberg pardoned Willis under the condition he leave Idaho within 20 days and never return. A common stipulation during this time period that we see in many other cases, such as George Hamilton in episode 13. The Brundridge family moved to Oregon. In 1902, Willis swore out a warrant against a local man named Walter A. Swartz for sexually assaulting his daughter Maggie, who was only 15 at the time. Officers arrested Swartz, but after the preliminary investigation, Judge Horgan dismissed the case due to lack of evidence. It was Maggie's word against Swartz, and she had no witnesses to verify the attack.
Which is not something that has ever gone away. That's unfortunately still very much an issue.
In 1905, the court appointed Willis to be the guardian of his sons George and Ernest. There's no real explanation of why this happened. This is also about the time where the paper trail on Elizabeth Brundridge disappears. I'm not sure if they got divorced or if she died, but she's no longer in the picture. In 1906, Maggie married and moved to Haley, Idaho. The next year, Willis, working as a teamster, remarried Olivia E. White. In 1909, Willis, suffering from emphysema, died of sepsis at age 59, though his death certificates list his age as 61. The news articles mentioned he left behind 4 sons and 1 daughter. Willis outlived his father by 22 years and his oldest son Samuel by 34.
Yeah, that's like a hard life for 59. He had a rough go of it, for sure.
So sad. So many tragic themes. Mm-hmm. Ira, on the other hand, did not receive an early release. Let us return back to the prison in 1901. Ira eventually served his time with many people we've talked about on the show, including Andrew McClaven from Stool Pigeon Saturday, Showdown in Idaho, David Norwood, episode 75, Diamond-Filled Jack, episode 23, and later on even Ida Larceny, episode 20. Out of the 140 men, women, and children in the prison at the time, some were adjusting better than others.
It's so wild that you say children, and it's like, I was like, children. Oh, yeah, no, we did. Yep, they definitely did.
Having broken up with his accomplice and lover, Josie, Alfred Friel in particular seemed to be struggling. It's one thing to see an ex-lover, it's another to have to be locked up with them, especially now since Josie started showing a romantic interest in William Thomas, see episode 6. Alfred began acting out and starting fights. On June 25th, the men were exiting the newly constructed dining hall. Harry Gordon, serving a term for murder in the second degree, and Ira were standing next to each other when Alfred told the two men he planned to
cut the guts out of you before sunrise.
In response, Gordon hit Alfred, who fell smacking his head against the stone floor. Gordon then used his tin cup to strike Alfred's head again and again.
Oh, no.
Alfred at first foamed from the mouth before beginning to vomit. Dr. Dubois arrived and declared the wound fatal. However, Alfred did live, and the guards put Gordon in the dark cell. On July 10th, after the warden learned of the threat towards Gordon and Ira that led to the fight, he relocated Gordon to cell lockup and ordered Alfred to take his place in the dark cell.
Oof.
Ira, despite being threatened, seemed to be more of a witness than a participant in this fight. On October 20th, the Salvation Army came to perform a service on behalf of those in prison. But James Johnson, who at 18 years old stood 5 feet and 8.5 inches tall, did not watch the service. Instead, he and Ira fought it out with their fists. Turnkey Donnelly separated them, and after learning the cause of the fight, reported that
both of the men were in the wrong.
This fight caused Ira to be downgraded from a first-grade prisoner to the very lowest-ranked third-grade prisoner, after which both of them received punishment in the dark cell until December 1st on a diet of bread and water. Twice a day.
So cold.
Yeah.
Oh.
40 days in solitary confinement in 1901 makes me guess this probably was a pretty gnarly fight.
Yeah.
On December 1st, guards brought Ira out of solitary confinement to see Warden Arney, who angered Ira's
impudent
behavior and then
order him into the dark cell.
Ira spent the holiday that year confined to his cell. But guards did return him to full rations, probably in hopes of preventing starvation. Still, it's hard to imagine how much weight he would lose after 40 days of bread and water. On New Year's Day, January 1st, after 71 days in confinement, Ira once again joined others in the prison yard. Ira, despite being threatened by Alfred in his fight with Johnson, did appear to make a few friends in prison, such as Brent Hillman, David Kidd, see episode 55, and Bob Meeks. Guards reported,
"Last night, convicts Hillman, Kidd, Meeks, and Harder, when the electric lights went out, made noise of all kinds and talked to each other, which is against the rules. It was ordered that convicts Meeks and Harder be closely confined except when working on the rock piles, and they be kept at work on said rock piles until further orders."
During Ira's incarceration, the prison executed Ed Rice in 1901, episode 90, James Conner in 1904, and Fred Bond in 1906, episode 7. He also saw the arrival of the most famous resident of them all, Harry Orchard, who killed Governor Frank Studenberg in 1905. By 1908, the prison, with 15 guards on payroll, now had 209 residents. Ira, due to his good behavior, earned status as a trustee, as well as the privilege of working with the horses. After years of cutting stone and doing hard manual labor, I can only imagine the joy of this responsibility. On July 6, at 6:15, guards checked on Ira working in the stables. They continued to make their rounds, but at 7, once they returned to the stable, they discovered Ira missing. The guards sounded the alarm. They armed themselves with guns, got dogs, and took off hot on Ira's trail. The dogs followed the scent down to Mosley's Place, a short distance east of the penitentiary, but lost the trail. After some searching, they caught it again. It led to the river, heading west towards the natatorium and the city of Boise. But once they got to the banks of the river, the dogs lost the trail. This time, permanently. Ira likely ran and swam his way to freedom. The prison never saw Ira again. The warden quickly created wanted posters to distribute to different sheriffs in other cities.
$50 reward will be paid for the arrest and detention of convict NO679, Ira Harder, who escaped from the Idaho State Penitentiary at Boise, Idaho on the 6th day of July, 1908. Name, Ira Harder. County sent from Washington. Crime, murder, 2nd degree. Term, 25 years. Nativity, Utah. Weight, about 160 pounds. Age, 31 years. Height, 5 feet, 6 inches. Build blocky. Complexion light. Color of eyes, hazel. Color of hair, dark brown. Scars and peculiarities. Powder stains on the upper lip. Sandy mustache, not very heavy. One toe next to little toe on right foot gone. When last seen, he wore gray cashmere pantaloons, faded blue check shirt, prison-made rob-nailed shoes, and white slouch hat. Please post in a conspicuous place. If arrested, notify me by telegram at my expense. Any information obtained, please forward to me without delay. E. L. Whitney, Warden, Idaho Penitentiary.
Stain on his lip. I know.
You have to be about less than 4 feet away. So he would have had to take that bullet like so close to your face.
And he's still got that bullet in his shoulder and everything, right? Ooh. And he's missing a toe.
Ooh.
This guy also had it rough.
Man. A $50 reward is pretty standard for the history of the prison. During 1908, $50 translates to about $1,700 in modern currency. Soon after this escape, John Chickarine on 10 Mile Creek reported his stolen horse. Ira quickly became the prime suspect. But after the sheriff discovered the horse a short distance away from the farm, they dismissed this theory. 5 men in total escaped the prison that year, including H.D. McGarr, Ira Harder, William Thomas, Del Wadley, and David Norwood.
It's a rough year for the warden.
Yeah, sorry, Whitney.
1908 was not a good year for the prison. Ira Harder from this point disappears from the record, but there seems to be very significant evidence to suggest Ira Harder moved to California and assumed the name Edward Waldo. If you're wondering how in the world we figured that out, we didn't. Credit there belongs to Lori Fell. She did incredible detective work and put together this mystery with us and helped us figure out what happened to Ira. But for now, I'm going to continue on with Ira's story, who I will start referring to as Edward. At this point in his life, it is utmost importance for Edward or Ira to keep his head down, stay out of the papers, and sneak under everyone's radar. Skye, Anthony, do you think he managed to stay out of the papers?
I would guess not, based on the amount of papers I still see sitting.
Yeah.
But also, are you telling me, once again, that you actually played a real-life game of Where's Waldo?
Yeah, a little bit.
I'm so excited.
And he's even wearing stripes.
Yeah.
That's true. I didn't even think about that.
They're black and white, not red.
We should do an interactive exhibit where it's Where's Waldo, and it's just like, we just make a painting, but it's Ira in all the different places.
Yeah. That would be hilarious.
That would be so funny.
If public recognition could lead back to incarceration, you are risking a lot just by being seen. So what in the world do you think was so important to Ira to risk his freedom over?
A lady.
That was my first guess. I'll say, civic engagement, volunteerism.
He is so involved in local politics. He is into it.
Emma Frieda Thorne was born in Germany in 1879. She immigrated to the United States like so many others looking for a better life. In the U.S., she met another immigrant from England named William Ramsden, a Midwestern farmer. In 1902, Emma, at 23, married the 56-year-old Ramsden. It appeared the couple never had children together, but Emma helped care for the 2 children from a previous marriage. The couple moved to California, where Ramsden began to operate a hotel and boarding house. However, the couple began to face turmoil. The Evening Mail put it simply by saying, "It seems that Mr. and Mrs. Ramsden found the matrimonial sea rough. The longer they traveled it, the bigger and rougher the breakers became, and finally one day the vessel went down in a storm of domestic chaos. Both reached the shore, again looked over the mystic waves with longing eyes.
That's exactly how I read it in my head when I read stuff like that. I'm like,
I love, they're so dramatic back then. You're just like, they wanted to be like poets and writers. And so the flourish of these old newspapers is like chef's kiss beautiful.
It's so good.
To summarize the Evening Mail's poetry prose, the relationship was not working out, and the couple separated.
What did it say?
The court approved their legal separation, and after receiving an interlocutory decree of divorce, Emma went to try and find a new life in another part of California. The following year, in 1912, she met a mysterious ranch hand named Edward Waldo in Bakersfield. Edward began to court Emma. When he proposed marriage, the smitten Emma readily agreed. At the listed age of 41, though likely 35, Edward and Emma, 33, were married on July 17th, 1912, by Justice Albert Parker. Emma took Edward to see her ex-stepchildren and announced the marriage to Ramsden. I'm not sure what the motive was for going back to her old family. Maybe she wanted to show off her new, younger husband to Ramsden?
Neener, yeah.
Or perhaps she really loved her stepchildren and wanted to see them again. Either way, it inspired Ramsden to move on because he met a new woman, and in a few months they were engaged. That August, Ramsden took his new bride to the court to marry, but Judge Smith refused. After going through the paperwork, the court learned the divorce had been approved, but a final decree never granted because Ramsden had failed to finish filling out the paperwork. Incensed, Ramsden began to berate Judge Smith, who found it
necessary for the court to remind him where he was and to whom he was speaking.
Ramsden angrily yelled out,
"My wife got a license and got married right here in this county, and she didn't have to show any final decree."
This one remark cost Emma dearly. Law enforcement arrived at the Waldos' home and arrested Emma and Edward for the crime of bigamy. Both claimed innocence of the crime. They thought the pair were in fact legally divorced, but that did not stop the court from taking criminal prosecution against the couple. After Emma changed her plea to guilty, Judge Smith seemed to find a little bit of mercy. He did not sentence her to the California penitentiary, but he did annul the marriage between her and Edward and force their separation. Judge Smith sentenced Emma to 3 months probation, during which time Edward would be allowed to support her, but they could not live together as man and wife. Needless to say, the papers ran with this story. A desperate love triangle and a couple being torn apart by an ex-husband's lazy paperwork. In the end, the papers declared the winner of the fight to be Cupid. Surrounded by a labyrinth of difficulties, including the strong arm of the law, Dan Cupid this morning demonstrated his ability to come back in
Did
a
they
great
just call
shape.
him Dan Cupid?
They called him Dan Cupid.
Not Dan. Daniel Cupid is what we're calling him?
What?
I looked it up. Apparently during the 1900s, sometimes they referred to Cupid as Dan Cupid.
Wow.
Have you ever seen that in?
Isn't Cupid, isn't like an old like Greek thing?
Yeah.
So we're just like, good old Daniel.
That makes no sense.
No
I have
sense.
no idea.
I know.
That's, I think, my favorite factoid so far, though, is Dan Cupid.
There's probably some weird thing that was accidentally printed or something, and then like it just caught on.
Yeah, totally.
Demonstrated his ability to come back in a great shape by bringing together in happy wedlock Edward Waldo and Miss Emma F. Ramsden, both of this city. It was a strenuous task for even the little god to perform, and he came nearly being out of breath when the last obstacle on the rocky road had been safely passed. The blushing bride has blushed before, but never more furiously than this morning.
Wow.
This newspaper writer is insane.
Yeah. I always have such a hard time when it's like a remarriage, finding any mention of that in the newspaper. The first marriage, it's like sometimes there's the photo and everything.
Well, and I wonder if it's because of the court, the court drama.
And I feel like they didn't like the ex either.
Yeah. I got the impression the ex was really good at making people angry. Kings County, overturned Judge Smith's term of probation, and Edward and Emma were allowed to be married once again.
Wow.
Very
Yay,
nice.
Dan Cupid. Well done, sir.
Oh, good work, Dan.
The couple were again happily reunited. However, not all had been resolved. On December 2nd, Ramsden showed up the Waldo's front steps, an unexpected visitor, there to reclaim some items. According to Ramsden, Emma's sewing machine belonged to him, and she'd forfeited her right to it when she left him the previous year. After their arrest and subsequent trial, I doubt either Emma or Edward were the biggest fans of the 66-year-old Ramsden at that particular moment. I also think Ramsden did not have any idea of the man he was picking a fight with. Edward, as we've seen, was a man who struggled to control his temper. Ramsden, as we've seen, knew how to aggravate others. Edward did not give Ramsden the sewing machine. Instead, he threw him down the stairs. He must have regretted the move instantly because he ran down the stairs to check on Ramsden. His anger not only got someone hurt, but another arrest could lead to the exposure of his true identity. Edward ran and got help, and they waited there with the injured Ramsden until the emergency patrol wagon arrived. None of Ramsden's injuries proved to be serious, and 2 days later, Edward received a $100 fine, which Emma paid on his behalf.
So he got lucky.
Close call. Gee.
The newspapers also love this story. They ran it under the caption, "Second husband throws number one out. Bump, bump, bumpity bump."
Wow.
Sorry, what newspaper is this?
The Evening Mail.
From
California.
Amazing.
Roast.
Yeah. I hope this writer just continued to get promoted because bumpity bump bump. Amazing.
The last legal trouble I found in Edward's story happened in 1915. The Waldos began having a property dispute with the McFarlands, especially concerning the McFarlands' turkeys, who continued to go on the Waldos' land and eat the crops Edward planted. On December 8th, Edward found the turkeys again on his land, again eating the crops he had just sown. He put the turkeys into one of his pens and sent word to William McFarland that he did not plan on returning them until McFarland paid for the damages the turkeys had caused. William McFarland, along with his 2 sons and wife, went to Ira's farm and demanded the turkeys back at no cost. During the argument, McFarland claimed Ira got a gun and fired at it, which Edward adamantly denied. McFarland took Ira to court on a charge of assault to murder the following year. The defense requested that all witnesses not be allowed to enter the room while the others testified to prevent testimonies affecting one another. Judge Tabaruku agreed, and this tactic proved to be highly effective, and the jury acquitted Edwards right away. This is the third and final time after Ira's escape from prison that he came under close scrutiny by law enforcement. But yet again, no one made the connection between the farmer and rancher Edward Waldo. One thing I found particularly fascinating was the descriptions the newspapers gave of Edward. Here's how our favorite The Evening News described him. Waldo, a big sturdy man who has seen the sterner side of life, and his bride have announced they will forget the past and look only to the rosy future.
Oh.
In 1916, the couple welcomed their first son, Edward Ira Waldo, in Ohio. The following year, Emma gave birth to Herbert in Minnesota. Edward farmed his entire life, but also made money working as a barber and doing ranch work. By the 1930s, the family relocated to California. Meanwhile, the relationship between Ira's sister, Elizabeth, and ranch hand John did not last. And in 1923, Elizabeth remarried Charles Logan Montgomery. There, of course, remains the question of who knew Edward Waldo's secret. Did his current family know his real identity? Did Edward ever reach out to anyone from his past life? One of his family members claimed he did. If you remember Ira's oldest niece, Caroline, who her mother gave birth to at 15, Caroline went on to have 7 children of her own. Her 4th child she named Viola. In 1979, Viola wrote to Kathy Hodges, working for the Idaho State Penitentiary in a role similar to what Anthony does now. She wrote a letter explaining that as a child, she believed she met Ira. She wrote,
"He returned to Idaho. I'm not sure exactly, in the mid-40s or 50s, to my mother's place at Orchard, an old tired. And mother said lovely. He wanted to see his sister Lizzie Harder Heath. She lived in California, I don't know where. He stayed a very short time, saying he was afraid if the authorities found out he was there, he'd be put back in prison. He had to be in his 80s. He just talked a short time. He said he had to go, and did, as far as I've heard. He was never seen from again."
This, of course, is a recollection of Viola at 72, trying to recount an event that took place many years in the past. She admits in the letter that she does not know for sure if this was the real Ira, but that she suspects she had. I do think this is a very real possibility. Ira would have been closer to 60 in the 1940s, but he lived a very hard life, and I could see how Viola's memories could have aged him in her mind. She also talked about meeting Ira Sr. for the first time, and him moving in with them before his death of cancer. Viola explained before his death, Ira Sr. often called out for a man named George, who she suspected of actually being Ira. This I'm much more doubtful of. While it's completely possible Ira used the alias George, by all historical documentation I could find, Ira did not have any kind of relationship with his birth father or his stepfather for that matter. Viola does mention that her family, her grandmother in particular, talked about Ira a lot, to which she said,
"Somehow, as young as I was, I also felt sorry for him."
Ira's sister and Viola's grandmother Elizabeth passed away in 1952 in Oregon at 80 years old. As for Edward Ira Waldo, he passed away in Lodi, California in 1947 on July 26. The cause of death is listed as tuberculosis, but the doctor also lists epithelioma on Edward's lip, often used to describe cancer. My father, who is a pharmacist, was kind enough to go through the death certificates as well as look up some 19th century medical terminology. This term can be used to describe skin tumors or growths, both benign or not. We came to the same conclusion this term could have also possibly been used to describe a scar, like a gunshot wound to the mouth, for example. The papers reported that Edward Ira was survived by his wife, 2 boys, and 3 grandchildren. His age is listed as 67. But if this really was Ira, he would have been only 70. 4 years later, Emma, at age 72, also passed away in Lodi, California. Edward Waldo died 39 years and 6 days to the day that Ira Harder escaped from the Idaho State Penitentiary. Out of the 500 escape attempts, Ira remains one of the 90 to never be recaptured.
Wow. So interesting. Really, really interesting. And amazing that he was able to keep this other identity under wraps, which of course...
Yeah. His life depended on it.
Yeah, his life depended on it, and it was a time, again, when you could.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this story, and the theme that I keep returning to is family. Family, or your lack thereof, is so instrumental in the development of who you become. It's hard not to think of Willis, who at such a young age saw his father murdered. I wonder how that affected him, how it affected the way he raised Samuel. But I have to also think about Ira, who lost his entire family at such a young age, who went out into the world at 6 and never had a parent to show him how to control his temper. Both Willis and Ira carried generational trauma that seemed to affect them both their entire lives. Out of all the places you could go and things you could do after assuming another identity, I think settling down on a farm to live the rest of your life with a family is a pretty good option. Ira, for all his faults, for all his mistakes, did manage to finally find the thing he'd been missing for most of his life: a family. Sources, of course, were newspapers.com, ancestry.com, findagrave.com, Family Search, Idaho State Archives, Idaho Penitentiary Prison Records, Idaho Penitentiary Guard Records, the Weiser Library, and the Weiser Historical Society. At 204 pages of research, this endeavor turned out to be much larger and more complicated than I expected. About a dozen thank yous to those involved in helping us tell this story. First off, thank you so much to everyone at the Idaho State Archives, including Jim, Misha, and David, who helped give me access to hundreds of pages of court documents from Washington County. Thank you to the Weiser Public Librarian Tony Edmondson over at the Weiser Historical Society for all your help. Next time you're in the area, make sure you go check out the Snake River Heritage Center to learn more about Weiser history. Finally, big thank you to Lori Fell, who first reached out to help confirm her suspicions. She spent over 2 years of research to try and track down why her family genealogy wasn't matching up, and was able to uncover an incredible mystery. And we're so grateful for her reaching out and all the work she put into this project. I've gone back and forth on whether or not it's even worth sharing, but for those of you who know me know I'm pretty skeptical by nature. I'm a very skeptical individual. While I love nothing more than discussing the supernatural, I'm not a super strong believer or the type of person who puts a lot of weight into coincidences. In 2022, after being promoted to the position of technical records specialist, I was beyond stoked to be working essentially a dream job, and on my first day, Anthony gave me Skye's old desk. Skye's desk, for those who've never seen it, is decorated with 9 mugshots of different women. Naturally, the first week I printed off a few extra mugshots to add to the collection, and one of the first ones I chose purely by accident was the mugshot of Ira Harder. Nice. Now, my desk photo collection has expanded pretty dramatically. They cover the walls, and I have at least 150 photos up there. But when I first got the message from Lori about helping her do her grandfather's genealogy work, I was shocked to see a face I recognized. Before I was in the position of the education and research coordinator, before I was even helping host this podcast, I've had a photo of Ira sitting in front of my desk looking down on me as I work. Mm-hmm. Is that not so
That's
weird?
so cool.
Yeah, I love that
weird.
stuff. Like that's why I put all those pictures up there at the beginning, was because you feel like, and once you did research, I'm sure you were like, this picture like takes on a whole new meaning because you now know their story, and you kind of know you know he had a temper, and you kind of know his personality, and there's something that's like very special about connecting with those individuals, even if you don't have a familial connection or any other kind of connection. And so I like, that's so great that you now got to, I understand that now, and he's just been looking down on me this whole time. I don't know, I'm such a nerd because that's I love that so much.
Yeah, we just have to post a photo of Samuel's office now.
I know, seriously.
I know. Let me click.
It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised if we do that a couple more times where you're like, I've been looking at this person.
Yeah. It was bound to happen with how many photos. It was just weird that it was one of my first.
That's
really
what
makes it so cool. Yeah. At this point, I've been in contact with several members of Ira's family on both sides who reached out to me independently. And for those family members listening to this today, I truly hope I did Ira's story justice. For any Brundridge family members, I hope you feel the same. I want you to know this story, as any others we tell on the podcast, we do with the best intentions and with the hope that the history would tell itself. We feel so honored to be able to share these stories. We hope that by doing so, we help preserve their history. And in instances like this, we are able to help solve a few of the old Idaho penitentiary's many, many mysteries.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because I think we have always tried to go about this endeavor with the utmost amount of respect, because everyone who came in, no matter what they did, deserves respect simply by being human. And I think, especially with how convoluted this story was, I'm sure the families are so grateful. Just a call that if any families know of their genealogy and know someone in the penitentiary, we would love to hear from you. Get more information, because we really only have the side of the prison records and any other public records we can find to tell the story, and that is not even a portion of it. Like, it's just the smallest portion of who they were as people and their life story, and so thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Having families connect with us is a way for us to try and make sure we're telling the whole story.
I mean, and really, I think the ultimate lesson is watch out for Dan Cupid.
Yeah.
Totally.
Dan Cupid will get you.
He'll turn your life around, Daniel. I can't believe that. It's my new favorite fact of all time. I mean, I guess we'll close it out a little bit differently, so do your own time.
Do your own number.
Keep looking for Waldo.
If you enjoyed Behind Grey Walls, please rate, review, and subscribe so others can find our podcast. If you're interested in more Old Idaho Penitentiary information and to see mugshots of the inmates featured in this episode, follow the Old Idaho Penitentiary on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to learn more about the Idaho State Historical Society and its other sites, follow ID State Historical Society on Instagram or visit history.idaho.gov. If you have a question or comment for the hosts, please email us at behindgraywalls@gmail.com.
Special thanks to voice actors Draven Brown, Tristan Hafer, Jerry Broad, Rob Goodwin, Alexandra Polidori, Kane Scaffer, Alex Provon, Emily Blair, Virgil Clark, and Jack Horkade. Thank you very much.